speaker today, Miss Enriqueta Labros-Walls. And let me first introduce a little bit about her background. And I think she is here with me. Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
here, but I'm trying to connect my camera. It didn't work.
Right, Enriqueta. We'll wait for you. Until that time, let me introduce a little bit about her background. She's a senior lecturer in Bartlett School of Architecture, University College of London. She's also the co-founder and CEO in Relational Urbanism and co-founder of Labros Taboni Architects. One of her key areas of interest is on planetary commitment with the environmental challenges the humanity is facing today, stressing the need of cultural identity and the sense of place. And she's also involved in many research projects crossing the boundaries between landscape architecture, architecture, and engineering. So today she is going to, in this session, she is going to talk about the topic encoding and decoding patterns of planetary urbanization. So Enriqueta, we are delighted to have you join us today to deliver this guest lecture. And
Um,
yes, is
and
is it
thank
going all
you.
right,
I
Enriqueta?
mean, well, the problem is that the camera is not showing. Um, I guess I can share the slides, but you cannot
Slides.
see me, which is quite unfortunate. I mean, I check it with other devices, with Zoom, with Works, and with um,
I know sometimes these technical difficulties arise without no reason, isn't it?
yeah. All right. Um,
I
well, I'm
think it's
sorry
all
about
right
that.
if you can share the presentation.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's go ahead with that.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. Okay. So let's go. Um, okay. So good morning. Well, thank you for inviting me to give this lecture. It is my very great pleasure to share this session with you. And today I'm going to talk about what I've been working both in the practice and at the school, at the Bartlett School of Architecture. And this idea is, let's say, concentrated in this title, Encoding and Decoding Patterns of Planetary Urbanization. So this photo, I think it's 9 years old already. It is one of the first field trips that we did here at the Bartlett School of Architecture, and it was to Canada, to Fort McMurray. So we went to visit Alberta oil sands, tar sands, which are basically open pit mining to extract oil. And you can see the scale of the infrastructure by looking at this little dot here. This is one of the vessels. Um, so this is the town. This is Fort McMurray, and actually this is a property boundary map showing the ownership of the different oil companies. So each company owned this, have the rights to exploit this part of the land. And this is the infrastructure that is developed in order to extract the oil, and these are the open pit mines. So when you put one of these open pit mines against Manhattan or against Barcelona, this is the scale of one of the open pit mines. And it's not only about the scale, but actually the transformation that these operational landscapes take on the territory also create features that you can find in geography, such as the delta. No? So this is a natural river delta, and this an artificial delta that is created in the process of um, ex- oil extraction from the sand. No, this is like a mix of sand, water, and bitumen is all mixed on the ground. And when the oil price is high enough, it is worth extracting it, and then the process is quite polluting, really an environmental disaster. So this is the picture of one of the mines. Um, so this is a fragment of the video that we presented for the cluster presentation last year. And the last year topic was Kiss the Ground 2.0 is because we copied the title of Kiss the Ground from Netflix. And here we can see the global land distribution analysis developed by Esri. And what is interesting is that what you will see now, this half dot is actually the area that world cities occupy. And what happens is that it is not cities, but how do we feed cities? How do we support cities? And that is really creating a big impact on the global land use change. So in here you have a distribution of what is the the forest. So what this if we will concentrate this global land use, we could see that actually this is like all the forests could fit in Europe, and the Arabic Peninsula and Asia. Then you have bare lands. These are like uh, bare land area, and actually to feed cities that occupy Zambia, you need to use the whole area of Africa, North America, and Central America, and part of South America. So this gives you a proportion of how we as a planet are currently use the land we have available. Um, so when we take a closer look at where the croplands are, because it's not only about the quantity but the quality, of course, we can see that croplands occupy the most fertile and the richest uh, part of the planet, leaving little space for biodiversity. And I want to pass this presentation a little bit faster and just go to the main points. So basically, one important thing about the croplands is not only how much it occupies, is that actually 60% of the land dedicated to cropland is dedicated to 4 species. So, and so that is soya beans, rice, wheat, and corn. And of course, this distribution has to do with the culture. So basically, the way our food habits is highly related to culture, and it's like localized in different parts of the planet, depending on what is the dominant culture, food culture. And of course, when we think about agriculture, we might think about this organic idea of agriculture, but actually it's not. These are highly industrialized landscapes that have a lot of like very serious consequences in terms of pollution. And when we took a look at the picture of the pasture land and the amount of the area that we dedicate for cattle, we are within the similar circumstances, just occupying the richest and the prone diversity areas. And also we are just basically focusing on 4 species. Yeah? And this is also, I think, this connection between culture, the cultural centers, the global centers for culture that are today, which are the cities, and uh, where things are produced for these cities, yeah, and where are they, um, leads to a disregard on how we use these resources, and of course, it's leading to a rampant production of waste. Yeah, so in here I presented some key data about waste that it was published in 2018, but it's like in general terms, we have like 13.5 waste of recycle and 5.5 compost. Yeah, so yeah, there was this famous um, statement that said that there are more microplastic in the ocean uh, than stars that you have in the Milky Way. This is a very interesting map because this is the map of craters of waste, so landfills in the US. So you can see this ubiquitous landscape of waste that is really surrounding us. And then we have the problem of the great garbage patch. So uh, from my perspective, all this phenomenon has to do with what Edward Burtynsky defines as the landscapes of Anthropocene. These are the operational landscapes that sustain our lifestyle, but these landscapes are hidden from the sight of people and hidden from the sight of cities, which have become centers of irresponsible consumption and yeah, basically this disconnection of these two environments is one of the main causes of us disregard of the resources that we use. And of course, within this context, we started to look at how how we are really consuming these days. So what are the flow of food and how we connect to our resources and how we connect with other people. In this case, what you see here is Ocado. So basically, this is one of the centers in which the food basket of many people across the UK gets arranged, but also is other things that have to do with how do we purchase, how do we relate it, how do we find partners, etc. So uh, this is these computational methods and our way of connecting to other environments that are somehow remote to us is opening up the possibility of a new form of intelligence. So our question is, can this form of intelligence become an evolutionary learning system in which the collective intelligence, the individual and the urban intelligence can somehow be in a continuous conversation? So planetary urbanization. So uh, it is not a concept that I define it myself. I think you can go back to Henri Lefebvre and also to authors such as now Neil Brenner from Urban Theory Lab at the GSC. But the way I see it is a capital-driven Earth system in which a large variety of agents interact in a non-linear way, returning different levels of organization and hierarchies, each of them ruled by its law. So one of the consequences of this planetary urbanization is what is being called the Great Acceleration, which is when it is dated like around 1950s that the Anthropocene begins. And it is when really like emissions, use of fertilizers, population, world population that you can see here as well, start to grow exponentially. And one of the problems of this planetary urbanization is the disruption of the Earth biochemical cycle. The definition of the disruption of the biochemical cycle actually is better known, for example, by global warming, in a way that now we are disrupting how the carbon cycles and we are accumulating carbon in the atmosphere. But actually, the disruption of the Earth biochemical cycles happens with other main life elements. And one of other serious disruptions are the nitrogen cycle and the phosphorus cycle, which are not so popular these days, but actually they are these hidden problems that will come to light at some point. So one of them is phosphorus. This is what I put in this lecture, and actually phosphorus is the main component of who we are. It's a chemical element that is part of our DNA, but actually we extract phosphorus and use it as a fertilizer. So at the end of the day, we are disrupting what will be the natural cycle of this chemical element that should go into the bodies and then go back into the soil when we die. And we are just locating this phosphorus in the ocean as an ocean sediment. So because of our capacity and our technological capacity of transform and move resources across planet, which is unprecedented, we have a completely global network of redistribution of phosphate reserves and production. This creates important inequalities across the planet. So despite this disruption takes place across the planet, there are some countries that are benefiting from this disruption and some others that are just suffering it. And what you have at the end is a global pollution. In this case, the phosphorus pollution, it is related to with eutrophication and the creation of the dead zones. One of them, one of the large dead zones is in the Baltic Sea, and it's created mainly by Europe. So, so now I'm going to read a 1-minute manifesto that I also just put it in my international lecture series. It's the possibilities of non-computational ecologies. We are living a global state of emergency where we need new design methods that employ planetary information systems and media to foster a new sense of commonality for the built environment. These new design methods must acknowledge that architecture does not respond to the city anymore because there is no city, there is no urbanization, there is just planet and planetarization. The new space of architecture is the planet itself. A planet where there is no nature, there are just ecologies. Ecologies are both natural and artificial. They are interdependent units of material, information, and energy flow, a form of meta-intelligence subject to evolution for its own survival. This meta-intelligence is a permutation of human intelligence and constitutes the design material that allowed us to reformulate ecologies based on a relational construction of space, time, and value. This reformulation of planetary ecologies is the result of an open-ended and interactive creative process, which is by nature non-computational. So now what I'm going to present is a series of projects. Some projects belong to the practice, some projects belong to RC18 at the Bartlett School of Architecture, and I will discuss in which ways each project reflects what I just exposed. So the first project is Liffey Playpark. It was an international two-stage competition that it was organized by the Irish Architectural Foundation and Dublin City Council, and we won. And one of the premises was to create a people-centered design map. So in this case, this is the site before it got developed. And one of the problems that the site had was, well, it had a lot of like crime related and antisocial behavior problems. And for that reason, the client was very interested in how to engage the community in the development of the place and therefore build a sense of ownership and capacity of cooperation. And when we arrived to the project and we were presented as the winners, things were a little bit complicated in getting people to agree what kind of development they wanted, etc. So the pitch at the beginning was to develop a skate and play park, um, but and the idea was to try to see how could be as inclusive as possible and to bring other sectors of the community or maybe to expand the scale to a larger group of people. Um, yeah, so I'm just saying. So, for example, this fence that you see here is a high security fence that you put in jails. And the reason why Dublin City Council had to put it is because there was a lot of like problems that were happening under the canopy, just related to crime, drugs, really complicated stuff. So we wanted to do a form of consultation through the sun in which we built an interactive model which you could connect people's experience of a skate and understanding of how a skate movement works and form. Yeah. So in order to do that, we just built a sandbox and we capture the models with Kinect and we could project it on the screen. We did that engaging different groups of people, um, particularly young people. And then we also had other conversation and consultation with local residents and with agents for the park maintenance, etc. Okay. So this is a video of the participatory design process. So it was a feedback loop between capturing, editing, and interacting. So in here, we see how people were modeling, and then we were just capturing what they wanted, and then we had like a little digital interface in which we continue like readjusting and editing the model. I have to say that this model kept on editing and editing until we got, this is the final layout. We got the final layout in which we include roster inspectors, all sorts of like specialists for skate, etc. So this is the way it looks like now. So the way it got built. And I think what was interesting and we learned in this process is that if we wanted to be inclusive, we had to have a difference between the balls. So we had the concrete skate area and we had resin bound rubber balls. And that was because it was suggested by other groups of people who found intimidating to skate on concrete. So you can see here, um, yeah, the different areas that were um, defined. And this is the entrance of the park. So this skater had two sons. He had the skateball and the plaza. This is the final scheme. So some of the things that were quite controversial was the idea of the visual relationship between the homes that were along Lefano Road and what will happen with the noise. Yeah. So we did this strategy of cut and fill. So basically, that means that the airports that were extracted uh, to do the balls will generate this mount. So the idea, like the functionality of this was twofold. On the one hand, it directs, like it acts as a noise insulation, which actually has worked very well, and also the visuals that you have from the street is more like a beautiful garden, because one thing that they were concerned is that they were going to turn the park that they had in front of them, they were going to turn it into concrete. So I think this negotiation, like design as a negotiation device, and understanding that in all the interventions, you always have losers and winners, and different interest groups are going to have a different interest on, on your project is very important, and it, it is at the end the ethos of relational urbanism. It's the relational construction of a space, time, and value, and trying to understand and listen to different interest groups. So these are some photos during construction, a little bit ahead. And I think this idea of non-computational ecology relates with the process of knowledge creation and how different knowledge sources are introduced in the design process in order to generate the design itself. So what I mean by non-computational knowledge is because despite there was a computational method, part of the knowledge that was introduced as the design solution was the tacit knowledge, and this knowledge that is contained within the individual and its involvement in a specific context. So it's really based on experience. And here the model tries to capture that, whereas some of the knowledge that was also that was involved in the process has to do more the engineering or codified knowledge of the understanding of how the park will work in relation to sound. So there was this feedback loop between different type of knowledge. This is a video from the Iris Architecture Foundation that um, I think you can find it online, and I don't think we have time to see it all. But well, I think one it shows a little bit the process, so I'm going to pass it quickly. But I think what it reflects is the success of the project in building a sense of community and just this capacity of the community to cooperate and get ownership of the site. So, and I think one of the images that I like the most is one that comes at the end, in which you can see the kids cleaning their own, like really they understand what are the challenges that their environment has, and they take ownership and clean it and take care. And I think to a certain extent, of course, because we we don't have one here. You have a nice view of it, and etc. I think it has received some awards, the UN Habitat and other institutions. But I think what uh, what reflects this project is that first of all you need to like um, uh, a good cooperational framework that extends beyond what we can do as designers, and of course you need to have the right actors involved, but it also shows that design and the design process is very important in order to build this sense of ownership, which at the end of the day is a very important part of the solution of many environmental challenges we have today. And this research about how to connect with environments, how people can interact through tacit knowledge, respond to how the environment works, has been in the research cluster 18 for several years. And we have done it by making things that can sense and they can respond to what they sense. Like uh, some people say, making things think. And of course, this project um, is to a certain extent addressed to a smaller group of people and is quite localized. But we have also researched in the cluster how this idea of building a sense of um, community and sharing values can be extended to a much larger scope. And this is one of the students' project about the development of the I don't say it. It's the gas holders, no? So what to do with the gas holders that are basically industrial heritage, not in use currently in London. Some have been abandoned and some are dismantled. So how can we repurpose? What is the meaning of this gas holder? And so the question here was how can we create a much larger participatory process in which design was also the result of understanding how people value this piece of heritage. And they did it by doing data scrapping. They collected Instagram images about gas holders, and then they classify them by hashtags. So what people said about them. I mean, one of them was like sunshine. I mean, it was one of the keywords related to gas holders. And then they used these images once they clustered as some sort of like generative tool for a facade that could be built as a part of its regeneration. So they use cluster K-means algorithms to um, get the color codes, and they just have this um, yeah uh, design method. So the idea was that to create like some sort of like mass customization design toolkit. And if we go back to the schema of what is the process of knowledge creation, you still have the interaction of different knowledge sources. So on the one hand, you have a, all the pictures people generate, and of course there is tacit knowledge embodied in that because the choice of the angle and the date of the time and what you just perceive is not something you can codify. But also then you have AI approaches that have look at neuroscience as an inspiration in order to classify and to just generate new ones. So somehow machine learning from these images. So the next project I'm going to talk about has to do with this idea of connected environments and how connected environments um, um, uh, uh, is also a source of design process and is basically trying to develop a symbiosis between the architecture and the landscape dynamics that are in the territory. And it is a project that was developed at the practice, particularly Sami Al Qasim Cultural Center. Well, you know, Sami Al Qasim is one of the most important poets in the Arab world, and he is buried in his local town in Rameh. And his family and the foundation asked us to design a cultural center to celebrate his life. And one of the interesting thing about this is his relationship with nature, no? And he was saying a poet is a human being. I'm part of nature. I'm influenced by changes in nature, and my body is a part of this nature. Um, so we wanted to use these higher technologies in order to sense and to connect to the dynamics of the environment that what this natural landscape could bring. So let me see, like, and create this idea of symbiosis. I want to see, yeah. So I will go back, but I think what is interesting about this picture, and here you can see my partner Ayman and me putting these micro sensors, is the here you can see the type of landscape in which we had the project. So it's basically what is interesting is that you can see the Mediterranean and the Galilean Sea in both sides. It has it's a very beautiful side, and it's full of olive trees. So um, so in here you can see how we sense the site, we scan it, and we wanted to understand what are the environmental dynamics that are on this ground. It's like a living ground, a very complex living system, and also already modified uh, by humans and cultivated with the olive trees and the walls of the terracing. Yeah, this is the term of the poet. Yeah. So one thing that uh, I am very interested in it's being in the further development of my practice has to do with the idea of the the role of the soil in the biochemical cycle. So somehow we wanted to sense what is the role of the biota and the landscape in shaping the microclimate of the site. I mean, of course, I think these regions, the Middle East, is at the forefront of the consequences we are suffering in relation to global warming. So it's really getting really hot, and we wanted to see, and we have other projects there in which we are trying to see how can we improve the conditions of the microclimate and what is the role of the landscape and the biota for that. So this creates some sort of like patterns that are unveiled through this analysis and that show the potential of a landscape that could like work on the site. So the idea is how can we integrate a project, how architecture can work in symbiosis, can be in symbiosis with this functional pattern, this legal soil, without compromising it. So this video you see, it's a little bit the design process. Here we have the visual relations and how computational methods help us to unveil these patterns, and then how the architecture, it just comes as a result of like really reading these patterns and try to have um, an integration between the two, which at the end of the day is where do you touch the ground and what do you do with this ground. So this is one of the outcomes. I mean, there is more into that in the circulation within the museum and the role of the landscape, etc. So there is more material about that. But again, there is this um, feedback loop between values and cultural perception of landscape and the ethos of the poet, and these um, uh, digital simulation tools that help us to understand how the soul of a living creature works. So I think I will put an end to my lecture and therefore will be on time. Uh, Asking everybody what are the relevant design questions in the context of Anthropocene. And for that, I want to show one video. This is from um, the previous, from this year project. And if I can, I'm going to see if it can be, can you hear the video? Hello?
Not yet. I think it's, yeah, we can see now.
No, I don't, because so
It's,
you can see but you cannot hear it, right?
yeah, we can't hear it, Enriqueta.
You can't. I think it's because I'm not very good in Teams, you know. And anyway, because the sound is played, but I don't know. Um, so then I will explain the project, and we will just go through the video. So all the projects that we are developing now in RCIT, they have this planetary perception and how under disruption of the Earth biochemical cycles. But we want to see how the socio-technological systems are disrupting these cycles. So in this case, phosphorus, which I introduced it briefly in my previously in the introduction of the lecture, but also its implication in global inequalities. So how to link this global trade with a global map distribution of resources, exploitation, inequalities, etc. Yeah. So all the projects start like this, and how this unequal distribution of the resources is actually ending up in environmental degradation, and it's really sourced in our cultures in cities. Mm. So here they also, so this is one end of the year video. They have to do this 10 minutes video, and they also bring the theoretical background of the project. Yeah. So all these things. And their project focuses on Paris, and they look at the food production around Paris, and also the phosphorus pollution that is in Paris. But also they want to relate, so this exercise of mapping and gathering data about the problems of this the phosphorus pollution, uh, uh, that is in Paris, yeah, with the blue showing high levels of pollution. And in here we can see the crop distribution around Paris, but we can also see the access. So what is the poverty distribution, social housing in Paris, and like the idea of food deserts and how where food, yeah, it's arriving and how and who gets most of it, yeah. So they have this research question. So how can we intervene planetary organization with food in a new paradigm to balance food distribution and bring back ecological diversity? So the idea here was to bring back the production of food to the city and redistribute it in areas in which now there is lack of access of fresh food. Yeah, they did a data scrapping exercise in which they try to look for new forms of food diversity, in order to break down this correlation between the dominant cultures of food and the food cultivation. And they did the clustering algorithm to understand colors and relate colors to food, and brought into the building a new form of distribution that has to do with the idea of pixel farming. And this pixel farming could be informed by the data, like trying to understand how can these new um, recipes could really inform the distribution of pixel farming. So the idea is how can you get data from new food terms and bring it back to the city. They use an old infrastructure railway that is abandoned in Paris. It's called the Le Petit Ceinture, and they try to analyze what was the clustering of activities that take place in a market, and from this clustering of activities that normally surround existing markets, they will develop their own program. And they chose from all the sites they had, they chose this site, and they started to like understand how to connect the site, how to bring new uh, access levels, and solving accessibility and access to lighting. Yes, and here you see a lighting, and then the allocation of different forms of production, because actually food in buildings is like an ecology. There are different levels, and the levels are connected, some are technical, and how the water will circulate. And they define different material systems, and they evaluate how these material systems will impact visually in the proposal. So the idea is that in here, the phosphorus cycle will work in the ecology of the building, and therefore is recycled and doesn't go into the Baltic. And how can we repurpose this infrastructure into a new infrastructure for food production? So, I mean, the lecture tries to reflect on different aspects. On the one hand, it has this idea of planetary organization, but on the other hand, it is this issue about process of knowledge creation and what is the nature of knowledge. And it is something that it is very important in my research. And I would like to mention one of my favorite authors, which is not an architect. It's Roger Penrose. He's a mathematician. He's from the School of Cambridge, and he worked a lot with Stephen Hawking. And despite this is not his um, general, it's not his main field of work. He has a lot of um, literature about process of knowledge creation, and I really like this quote quote that says, "There is something in the physical action of the brain which evoke awareness. In other words, it is something in the physics we have to turn to. But this physical action is something which cannot even be simulated computationally. There is no simulation which you could carry out of that action. This requires that there should be something in the physical action of the brain which is beyond computation. And this is a fragment of a book that I recommend. It's called The Large, the Small, and the Human Mind, in which Roger Penrose trying to unveil human thinking and creativity through mathematics. It's a really beautiful book. So I think I don't have anything else to say. Maybe just to say thank you to all of you. And also, I want to bring some special thanks to a lot of people, which I cannot mention, but they are here in this slide and they have been contributors to a certain extent of all the projects I mentioned because no human is an island. So, not me. And yeah, this is the end of my lecture.
Thank you, Enriqueta. Very interesting insights. Actually, starting with urbanization has become a planetary urbanization with both positive and negative impacts on global pollutions like that. And also, a week before, our one of the seminal reading was about the Anthropocene. So our students may have many questions on that as well because some of our architecture and urban design students were questioning, okay, these global pollution, climate change, these are global challenges. And as an architect or urban design, we can do very little on that. And I think, Enriqueta, in your action projects, it's nicely showed how from even a small scale project we can contribute to that. So thank you very much. So the floor is open for questions. So whoever who asks the first question can simply unmute and ask the question, while others can use raise hand option. Who would like to go first?
Hello.
Hello. I'm sorry you cannot see me. I mean, it's not nice.
Yeah,
I don't know why.
thank you. Share the nice presentation. And very, very nice to show the process and the background of those research. But for to me, I have some question about some of the projects, like the sport park and later the another project. How do you think the local problem or local social relationship? Because I saw a lot of the background to research the global challenge, global problem, like the global pollution. But for the local community life, how to relate? Uh, for example, the first project, the sports park, like you mentioned, how the noise affect the surrounding neighborhood. I think this is a great part for the local influence. Um, um, can you uh, show us because I have more questions because the local environment related to many environment things like the people's life. So uh, this is my question because I saw um, a few about the local influence. Yeah.
Okay, yes. Thank you. I think from my experience, when we did the consultation for this project, we had to do the consultation the day and places where the local community was going uh, to get together, yeah, for an event that was related to the local community. That means that if we will just organize an event for consultation per se, we wouldn't have any turnout. So the bottom line here is that 80% of the local community are really concerned about the matters they concern to themselves. And why is that? Because people are already busy enough trying to put food on the table, doing their jobs and taking care of the children. And there is very little time left, you know. And actually, participation is a luxury. Normally, when you have wealthy places, people participate. Why is that? Because they have time. Their work is valued more and they don't have to work so hard. And it is a rule of thumb. So even when you want to relate to global challenges, you need to translate this how these global challenges are affecting their immediate livelihood. Because otherwise, people are going to tell you, I understand, it's a great mission, but it's not for me. I am already busy enough trying to pay my rent. Yeah, and you are going to have this a lot. So there needs to be a translation in which you bring the solution to the ground of what people need in this immediate time. This is another thing. It has to do with the time dimension. So most of the environmental challenges you have, the time dimension and the consequences are going to be in 100-year time, 150 years time. When you talk to the local community, you need to talk about now, because this is what the local community is concerned. It's about the now. Yeah. So there is the need to connect time and space dimension, the scale of the implications. And this is something that is defined as the tyranny of the small decisions. So people make small decisions that are framed in a short time and a scale, and the impact is a very large and time impact. Yeah. So you need to be the translator of that. Yeah, because otherwise it will just not work. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. I think we should to relate it to the global challenge and translate those to local. Yeah, okay. Um, Thank you.
I hope I
Thank,
answered the question.
thank you, Tao.
I try my best.
Any more questions? I Yes, Dimitra, please.
Hi, and hi, Enriqueta. Thank you so much for the amazing presentation and really, really interesting projects. I actually wanted to follow up on Tao's question and your response to it, because it's interesting to me what you said about people who have the funds and have the time to participate versus people who are struggling to kind of make rent, where participation becomes difficult. And I have an interesting example, or what I thought was an interesting example from public participation in New York City, where I found the opposite to be true, or I found different variations of that, actually, where um, people who were, or some people who were struggling to make rent and who were having a difficult time had become so frustrated that they wanted their voices to be heard, and they did participate in different projects and different initiatives. They did, make the time. I remember this one incident. I'll never forget it. It was a public participation workshop on Staten Island in New York. And it was organized by the MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, and it was part of a project for redesigning the public transit network on Staten Island, which is horrible, by the way. The buses there are just ridiculous. And there was this lady who lives on Staten Island but works in Manhattan, and she came to that workshop after a 15-hour shift with her son who fell asleep on a chair, but wanted to be there because her commute was 2.5 hours long. And because if this redesign of the public transit network took place, it would cut her commuting time in half. In other instances, I found that people who were sort of in the mid to upper scale, kind of income range in New York City weren't participating so much in these projects and in these initiatives because these problems didn't affect them as much. So I think there's different, variations of that, and in different cultural contexts, I found that the approach is very different to participation.
Well, I think, I mean, in that regard, when things affect immediately, people make the effort to participate. But when things, so that's what I try to mean is that people are not going to sacrifice their own time and resources unless they can see a return to them. And some of the challenges that we have in relation to the environmental challenges is that the scale and the time dimension that the environmental challenges have beyond traditional problems that have to do with how cities function, they are not really connected to the livelihood of people. So if we are talking about the phosphorus cycle and how the phosphorus cycle is disrupted and the consequences, long-term consequences that have on the planet, it's very challenging to connect this a planetary environment that is there and we can understand because we have the means to measure it and perceive it with the daily life of people. Yeah? And the more it's disconnected and the more people feel it is not really going to give an immediate effect on their livelihoods, the more just people are not willing to sacrifice their own time. Yeah, but of course things have changed as well. I mean, there is no one norm that suit everything. Yeah, that suits everything. You cannot really like make one statement that fits all, because also environmental awareness is being done through media, and we are more conscious about the importance of the sustainability of the planet, so people are becoming more and more involved. Yeah.
Thank you, Dimitra, for that question. And actually, I also agree with that because the public participation may differ depending on the level of challenge that particular project would pose like that. Because I have a experience in low income settlements when I'm dealing with. So because it's affected to their houses, they are really engaged with the project from beginning to end. It's like so I totally agree with that point. Any more questions for Enriqueta? Actually, I had a question, Enriqueta, at the first part of your presentation regarding the global pollution challenges, global state of emergency. So, with the current technological influences and this COVID introduced pattern of working remotely, Now, the prediction is future job opportunities are less concentrated in cities, and many jobs will disappear or emerge. And how will this reflect on the urban fabric and the planetary urbanization, as you think? Will this change towards a global state of emergence and global pollution challenges?
Mm, I think that um, well, I don't know what will happen. I mean, how much we will relocate or not. Uh, this, well, it is just my view, because this idea of communication technologies allowing for relocation is not new. It was already developed, but it didn't take place. But of course, when you have such a disruption of the global pandemic and we have been forced to work remotely, I think this, of course, will change things. I'm not sure how much it would change, to be honest, because it's very difficult to know. Um, in relation to the disruption of the biochemical cycles, um, I am not sure we I can see a solution by understanding by relocating people to another areas. Mm, Honestly, I I don't know which is the solution. Okay. Um, on the one hand, one of the students last year they did a project about the carbon footprint of media and the data centers, and it's huge. So we are working remotely, but actually it has a huge carbon footprint. We are streaming media, and this is thanks to a data center, and this data center is is consuming a lot of energy. So it's really a complex system that I cannot really anticipate if this will lead to something else. But one of the main problems I think we have now is the way we feed cities and uh, basically the food production. And we are just not leaving enough space for biodiversity. And um, we are not so conscious about the impact that the countryside has as an industrial system. So yeah, um, but I cannot anticipate what will happen. Honestly, it's not. uh,
Thank you,
Yeah,
Enriqueta. Yes, the urban configurations are constantly evolving with the change of
yeah,
patterns. It's complex situation.
yeah.
Thank you, Enriqueta. So it's 12:20 past. If there are no any more questions, we can conclude the session. Okay, thank you very much, Enriqueta, for joining with us today. Yes, um, we are going to conclude the session at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Apologies for the camera. I'm so sorry. It works in Zoom, and but I didn't try it in Teams. It's new.
No,
So
that's
I'm
totally
sorry about that. And yeah, all the best.
all the very best. Thank you. All the very best with your future research work.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. See you all.